V-am tradus și subtitrat un video despre complexitatea ADN-ului, ca să aflați și decideți voi înșivă dacă sunteți dispuși să permiteți cuiva să se amestece în ADN-ul vostru și să modifice ceva la el.
The amazing complexity of life is most clearly seen as we examine DNA, the most compact information carrier in the universe. Useful biological proteins do not exist outside of a living cell. Every experiment ever done confirms this fact of science. Chemicals never come alive by themselves, and the more we learn about how a living cell operates, the less excuse we have for rejecting our Creator. Coming up on today's edition of Origins, Fingerprints of Our Creator with Bruce Malone. Hello and welcome to Origins. I'm Ray Heipel. It's an honor to be your host today. During this program, we showcase interesting guests who present evidence from science, along with other important facts, validating the truth of creation and the accuracy of the Bible. Today's guest, Bruce Malone, earned a degree in chemical engineering and has 27 years' experience as a research leader with the Dow Chemical Corporation, while holding 17 patents for new products. In 2008, he became the executive director of Search for the Truth Ministries. This organization distributes Bible-affirming creation materials to students and prisoners internationally, giving away thousands of resources. Bruce speaks on the scientific evidence supporting creation at schools and churches around the world and has authored 7 books on this subject. Welcome to the program, Bruce.
I am super excited to be here, Ray.
Well, we are talking about fingerprints of our Creator. That's fascinating. What is that?
Well, God's fingerprints are on every molecule of life. And that's what we're going to talk about, how the design by a creator is obvious by looking at the molecules of life. I wanted to start by just talking about this idea of a simple cell. It's literally a little city, a single cell. It has barriers to keep certain things in and out. It has energy manufacturing centers. It produces electricity. It has highways for transporting material from one spot to another. It has enormous libraries filled with information, and it can replicate itself in an exact duplicate. It's like a computer on the desk, and the next day you come back and there's an identical computer sitting right beside it. No machine we make can do that.
Nothing even close.
Not even close. And furthermore, even the simplest bacteria is made of thousands of parts. The most common part being called a protein. We'll talk more about that. And none of these parts, the DNA, the protein, the enzymes, the polypeptides, all these complex chemicals, none of them occur except inside of a living cell. You can't go to Mars, you can't go to the ocean, you can't go to a pond, and you can't find biologically useful molecules. They don't exist unless made by life.
So we don't have the parts that we just find lying around and then cells. We see the cell and the parts already there.
Exactly. So even at the get-go, it is faith to believe these chemicals made themselves. It's faith to believe they came alive by themselves. It's also faith to believe God made them, but it is a reasonable faith versus a faith that contradicts experimentation and observation.
So here you're using the word faith to say something that we believe that we can't reproduce or actually see in action.
Right, right. It's a more irrational faith, but it's presented as science. Let me give an example of one part from one of the smallest forms of life. A lot of bacteria have little fibers hanging off the end of them called cilia, and they spin. They spin because they're driven by a little electric motor, identical in its structure and parts to an electric motor that runs a fan. It has a rotor and a stator. It produces positive and negative charges that repel each other and cause it to spin. Now I want to show a little movie of one of the more recently discovered bacteria from the fossil record that had not just one of these motors, but 7 of these motors driving 21 gears to cause these little spinning propellers. This is what we found out from the fossil record it looked like. See these 7 purple gears driving 21 little green gears. So they're all in sequence being driven by little electric motors attached to the back of this bacteria. And then here are the cilia, the little fibers coming out of them. But they all have to spin in sequence the same direction, the same speed in order to drive the bacteria forward. And because they're spinning, it can go forwards, it can stop, reverse the motors, and then go backwards, and it can go to wherever it needs to find nutritional or food sources. Now this was in the fossil record. This is supposedly the earliest form of life. And yet look at the complexity. Hundreds of parts needed to produce even just this one bacteria. Now, to put it in perspective, that little motor, if you look at a huge desert filled with sand, and then you were to grab a single small grain of sand, which I've grabbed on these tweezers, there's just one,
I can barely see it.
Little single grain of sand. 10,000 of those motors could be lined up across the width of that grain of sand. 10,000 of them. Side to side to side to side.
So we're talking very, very small.
Unbelievably small, made of various parts. So where do those parts come from that make the motor that is used to help build the bacteria? Well, we're going to talk about 2 chemicals that show the fingerprint of God. One is the amazing design of DNA. Now, DNA is like a library filled with information. It is literally a language. Every definition that fits what is a language fits what the DNA molecule does and how it performs. It's a sequence code of information that builds other parts that can be used to produce things. Now, the textbooks, the universities, the colleges, they'll say, well, all life came from a single source. It's just made of various building blocks. The most basic building block is called an amino acid. Those link up to form proteins. The proteins are like parts of a machine that link together to form the parts of the motor. Now, let me just use Lego blocks to explain the dirty little unspoken secret of modern genetics. I built this Lego model of a 747 carrying a space shuttle, and it has lots of parts. It has Lego blocks. Well, a lot of these same blocks could be used to build, a boat or a castle or an out west scene or whatever. The same blocks. Those are like the amino acids or the proteins. But you'll notice this Legos has specialty parts, jet engines, rocket engines, windshields, etc. Well, eventually, let's say we have to explain a more advanced form of transportation, such as the X-Wing fighter of the Star Wars.
We can't build those yet.
How do you transform the 747 into the X-Wing fighter? Well, it has the same blocks, say the evolutionists. It's just you rearrange the parts and you slowly modify them and they turn into a new feature. But you'll notice this one has warp drive engines. It has laser cannons for shooting things. It has a completely different shaped landing gear. It has a robot. Those parts are found in no other model.
So you couldn't take what you've already built and find them over there. They're not there. We haven't invented them yet.
See, you need an entire book of information to build this engine. That information is found nowhere in any other Lego model. For instance, you could look at ants. You could find half a dozen different ants, very closely related, supposedly, and yet 20 to 40% of the genes in that ant are totally different than any other ant in the animal kingdom. They're just suddenly there. They're called orphan genes. An orphan has no parents. They just suddenly appeared. See, DNA is like an entire library of information. One individual chromosome is like a section of that library, biography or nonfiction or fiction or whatever. An individual gene is like a book, just a single book or maybe a chapter in that library. Well, the gene is what makes a new feature. It's still a lot of information, but they've just suddenly appeared. It's like a whole book of information just appearing. No slow modification, no ancestor to it. It's just a whole book of information is suddenly there in this new animal.
Information in a book, in this book, that isn't in any of the other books.
It's not in any of the other books, not even any of the other ant books. It's just totally new. Just like a jet engine is just totally there. Let's talk about the amount of information in the DNA code. DNA can be read both forwards and backwards to produce these little proteins, which are the little molecular machines, like the parts of the motor in that bacteria. Let me give you an example. See, there's a word star. We can read that. We know what it means. It's a star if we read it forwards. But if you read the same words backwards, it means rats. Kind of different. Totally different
yeah.
meaning, different purpose. But it's the same arrangement of letters, just forwards versus backwards. If you look at the word deliver, if you read it backwards, it says reviled.
Very different.
Very different meaning. Well, DNA is like that, except entire chapters from beginning to end can be used to line up the little amino acids that make the proteins to make totally different little parts of molecular machines. Now, let me give you an example of how incredible this, how we should be in awe of a creator when we look at DNA. Suppose you work in a factory to make cell phones, and you're given an assignment as the engineer to write the manual of how to assemble the cell phone. And you tell your boss, yeah, I can do that. And then he's going out the door and he stops and he says, oh, wait, one more thing. We want to save money on the paper and ink. So I'd like you to write the manual so that when you read it forward, it tells you how to assemble the cell phone. But when you read it backwards, it tells you how to use the cell phone. Completely different purpose, function, and meaning.
I think that man's going to be looking for another job at that point.
There isn't an engineer or a supercomputer in the world that could do that.
It's one thing to take a word, 2 words, 3 words, but to take an entire
entire book of information
and
run it backwards to have a completely different purpose, function, and meaning. Like a different language, a different code. That's what DNA does. But see, that doesn't even begin to start to explain all the information compacted into this molecule. You see, there's also overlapping information. For instance, here's a sentence. I like chocolate that evening. Wow, that doesn't seem to make sense.
No, it doesn't.
I like chocolate that evening? Because it's been laid out to give 2 different functional purposes. If you just grab the first part to make that protein, it says, I like chocolate. If you then grab the second part with a little bit of overlap, it says later that evening. So you've compacted 2 different sentence functional meanings in the same set of letters by overlapping them. But it doesn't end there. You see the LAT was overlapped. There's also spliced information spliced into that DNA sequence. Let's look at the same sentence. I like chocolate that evening. Well, in this case, another signal could come to program another little molecular machine that will grab just certain letters out of the DNA, like the ones I've underlined here. And you look at it for a second to say, well, what does that say? Well, you line them up properly. It says, I like her hat. Completely different function, but the same sequence of information to form a different purpose.
And somehow there's something that knows to grab that.
Exactly. Elsewhere, there's something that tells the cell what parts to grab to produce the molecules that are needed to make the machines to make the cell work. But it's all written into that same letter sequence of the DNA. Unbelievable, isn't it? But it doesn't stop there. There's also embedded information that's buried inside of other letters, encrypted, some letters that mean other letters that are then transcribed to mean those kind of letters, like a code. DNA's folded in 3-dimensional structures that where it touches, it grabs bits and pieces of information. Are you starting to comprehend what God has done?
And we're talking about the information in every single cell.
Every cell of your body has the information needed to produce every organ, every part, your heart, your liver, your lungs, your skin, your blood, your brain, every part in every cell.
Not only is each cell doing all this, but they all have to work together, correct?
They're constantly communicating. Every cell's communicating amongst itself to send signals back to the DNA and say, I need more of this protein, I need more of that enzyme, I need more of this, stop making this, start making that. Then it has to transport it to the right spot, in the right amount, reproducing itself millions of cells per second in our bodies. The amount of information in our DNA is staggering beyond our comprehension. See, if you took the DNA out of every cell in our body, it would be equivalent, because we have 100 trillion cells in our body. That's how many, a ballpark, how many cells we have in our body. But if you just took the DNA out it would be equivalent to less than a teaspoon of sugar. That's all the DNA, 100 trillion cells. Now, every one of those is like a library of information. But without some sort of analogy, it's hard to comprehend. Well, so it's, a room full of books. Is that what we're talking about? Well, not quite. To get the analogy, you have to think of a stack of books that would go all the way from the surface of the earth all the way to the moon. And people, I think they don't even comprehend how far that is, because they see all these pictures of the moon and the earth, and they kind of look like if this represented the earth, and the moon's about a fourth the diameter, so this is pretty much to scale. They think of it like that. Well, in reality, the moon is about that far from the earth. It is an enormous different distance. Think of a stack of books all the way from the surface of the earth to the moon. Every one of them
information
filled.
in one cell.
Well, we're not done yet. You'd have to have that stack stacked up 500 times. 500 times just the amount of information in the DNA of one human body.
And there are scientists who would say this developed randomly, incrementally, by chance, over a long period of time.
And all that information is in this spoon right here.
Wow.
That's just one human being.
I don't have the faith to believe that.
And it's, as you saw, it's beyond our comprehension. Forwards, backwards, spliced in, overlapping, encrypted, and it's all there.
The greatest puzzle designer in the world couldn't even begin to try to write something that would work in all these different ways.
It is the fingerprint of an incomprehensible, intelligent, creative God.
Bruce, this is amazing. We need to take a break at this point. I hope you stay with us. We are looking at the fingerprints of God. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to Origins. We're talking to Bruce Malone, who's been sharing about the fingerprints of our Creator. Bruce, we're talking about the complexity of DNA, and we have some new props here with us on the table.
I'm probably breaking the rules, but we're going to have some fun.
Let's have some fun.
I needed some demonstrations to explain. The most common molecule of life is called protein. It's 100,000 different specific proteins make up the human body. Now, in every textbook, students will read, oh, we know where proteins came from. There was an experiment in 1952 where Stanley Miller put ammonia, methane, nitrogen in a chamber with water. He added bang, explosive sparks, and he created these little molecules called amino acids. Now, they're called the building blocks of life. An amino acid is like a single bead on a chain, and they'll link up amino acid after amino acid to form a long chain. And the chain is a protein.
Okay, the chain itself is the protein, and each link is an amino acid.
And they will, because of how the amino acids are arranged, it will bend and fold to form some little part of a molecular machine, like that bacterial motor is made up of 40 different proteins. Now, he made a few different amino acids. There's 20 different colors in every protein of life. They're arranged in a very specific order.
So the order, the sequence has to be
critical.
exact.
They have to be absolutely exact. Now, here's what happened in the experiment. Stanley Miller left oxygen out, because if you had oxygen, you wouldn't get amino acids, and you wouldn't get protein, and you can't have life. So he purposely left it out. But every layer of rock has oxidized rocks, showing oxygen's always been on Earth. So he broke the rules right to start.
So we have an artificially produced environment that never existed.
Very well stated. He also got a useless blend of amino acids. Half of them are right-handed, like a right-handed glove. Half of them are left-handed, like a left-handed glove. And yet life only uses left-handed amino acids. But he always got 50-50 of each. And they're identically reactive. He didn't get all 20 different colors. He got other chemicals that would stop the proteins from forming. And it's never been shown how you could get them all to line up in the right order. So what this experiment actually showed was life couldn't possibly have formed in this way, yet it's still in the textbooks over 70 years later.
Have they ever tried it again and come up with a better?
It's been tried thousands of times. The point being, Don't you think if they had a better explanation, that's what would be in the textbooks? They've never come up with anything better. But on the surface, they made a few of the little beads. Now let me show you what one protein actually looks like. Now this is about 3,000 amino acids long, but here would be a biological protein.
So this is one, all the amino acids, all the colors, different ones sequenced correctly?
This is all one protein.
Wow.
Now proteins average 300 amino acids long, but some of them are as much as 50,000 units long. So it's just coming out and coming out and coming out. It's still coming, still coming, still coming.
We can't even get it to come out with trying to produce it.
And every single color has to be in the right spot. There's a disease called sickle cell anemia. Hemoglobin is a protein, carries oxygen. If just one color's in the wrong spot, think of it, one color's in the wrong spot, it doesn't bend and twist quite right, it doesn't carry oxygen well. The average lifespan of someone with sickle cell anemia at the beginning of the century was 3 years. Now they're up to 30 and 40 years because of blood transfusions, but it's a miserable life because of one mistake on one protein. Now let's just think for a moment, how could random evolutionary processes make the correct protein? And that's what our other little demonstration's here for. Guess what? You get to be evolution.
Oh, yes, a new job.
Okay, yes, okay. Blind chance. You see, all evolution has to work with is blind chance because they deny there's a designer.
That's right.
So to be blind, we need to blindfold you.
All right, I got it.
So if you could blindfold yourself.
Okay.
Let's pretend we're making a protein and it's only 5 amino acids long. The average is 300, but every one, you got to get a green one first. You got to get a yellow one second, because if you don't, it's the wrong protein. It doesn't work. It'll kill you. So we have 20 different colors here. You're going to reach in and grab the first different color, and let's see if we get it in the right spot. Okay? All right. Wow, you're doing pretty good. I got to tell you, you're not bad for a blind man. Okay, we'll blend the second one over here. The third one right there. Keep coming, and then the last one right there. Okay. All right, so let's check it out and see how we did. Well, amazingly, it had happened once every 20 tries. You got the green one right.
How about that?
But the next one's wrong, so you're dead.
Oh,
the next one's right, and then it's wrong and it's wrong. 3 out of 5 are totally wrong.
And this is very, very small compared to
now,
that.
Actually, and I'm going to walk back around here, the odds of just getting those 5 amino acids right would be 1 try out of every 3.2 million times. It could never happen. See, now I want you to redo that. Pour those back in. Just pour them back in. Okay, now see if you can make a correct protein when you're not blind.
Oh, that's pretty easy. I can see the colors, so all I have to do is
you're doing a little bit better now. Yeah, a little bit better.
A little bit better here.
Okay, well, wow.
How about that?
The point being what? What did it take to get it correct?
Well, it took knowledge.
Intelligence.
Intelligence, that's right.
It's easy for intelligence, beyond our intelligence, to make biological proteins, but not beyond God's. But random chance could never do it. Yeah. It's the very definition of impossible.
Well, not only that, but we're sort of starting with the particles already, right? I mean, even if by giving them all the pieces in place, you're sort of giving evolution a big head start, are we not?
We are, and they don't exist. As I said, he didn't make all 20 amino acids. All 20 colors don't even exist when you do it by chance. So intelligence can do it, random chance cannot do it.
Even given like the environment and all the best conditions, which again we would need to account for from nothing, even then we can't get there.
If I do the odds, once every 20 times you could get the right, times once every 20, times once every 20, 300 times, and you run a normal calculator, the answer will be infinity. It would take infinity to even make one protein correct by random chance.
What, thousands, millions?
Let's end here. This is why God says what he says in Romans 1, verse 19 through 20. God said, that which may be known about God is manifest. That means obvious to them, every human being, because God has shown it to us. He's shown us his fingerprints. The invisible things of God from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by what has been made, the proteins, the DNA, the molecules of life, the complexity of life. So his eternal power and his very nature, his Godhead, so everybody is without excuse for belief in God because of what he's made. See, creation's there for a purpose, so we will know God exists. So we will want to believe him, we will want to obey him, we will want to follow him.
God has made it clear we can see his fingerprints. Do we want to see them? I think that's the issue.
I think it is a suppression of truth, which is also in that section of Scripture, Romans 1:18. You have to suppress the truth in order to not see the obvious.
Bruce, I want to thank you for being on today's program. These demonstrations were wonderful, very explanatory.
You're welcome.
And I want to thank you for being with us today. We saw that even a simple amount of sequenced information requires a designer. And yet when we're talking about DNA, which is present in every one of our trillion cells, we're talking about an amount of information and a complexity level beyond what man can even develop. And yet, according to modern atheistic science, all of this has to develop by chance. Well, it just goes to show you that, as we saw in our program today, we know what the Bible says is true, and the proof, it's all around you. Be sure to join us next time. And I want to remind you that the programs that we do here, Origins, take a lot of resources, a lot of people, a lot of time, a lot of money. If you're able to support us prayerfully and financially, that will help us to continue to keep our program on the air. Let's work together and reveal how awesome our Creator is, and we'll see you next time.